What if you could solve all your problems for just $2? Not buy a solution, but rent one. Get this. A woman on the verge of a full-blown family meltdown rents the perfect boyfriend for less than the price of a coffee, only to find out he's the one person from her past she never wanted to see again. And what he did next, nobody saw coming. It all started on a bleak Tuesday afternoon. Emily was staring at her phone as if it had personally insulted her ancestors. Across the table, her best friend, Olivia, was busy destroying a blueberry muffin, oblivious to her friend's inner turmoil. "Whoa! What's with the death stare?" Olivia asked, her mouth full. "Did your ex post a new vacation pic?" "Worse," Emily groaned. "My sister, my perfect sister, Sarah, is marrying a tech mogul. And Dad just texted me. Not to say congrats. Oh no. He texted, 'The wedding is Saturday. Please, try to look presentable.'" Emily emphasized the word presentable with all the disdain she could muster. Presentable. As if her default setting was mobile disaster area. "I'm the family's official train wreck, Olivia. I can't show up alone. I can't handle another 6 hours of so." Emily. Still single. Still working at that place. "I need a date. A fake date." Olivia's eyes lit up. This was the kind of drama she lived for. "Okay, I'm in. Who are we thinking? The cute delivery guy who always brings you extra sauce?" "No." Emily shook her head. "I need someone who looks expensive. An upgrade. Someone who looks like he's summered in the Hamptons and knows what a 401k is. An actor. A model. Someone to wipe that smug look off my sister's face." Emily immediately grabbed her phone and started searching a rent-a-date app. But her smile faded as quickly as it had appeared. "Oh my God," she whispered in horror. "They charge by the hour. At this rate, I'd have to sell a kidney just to afford a guy to stand next to me for one night. And that doesn't even include the fee for polite conversation." Olivia laughed. "Does it include a kiss? Or is that a premium add-on?" Dramatically, Emily slammed her phone on the table and opened her wallet with a look of utter desperation. She tipped it upside down. A tube of chapstick, an old receipt, and a few crumpled bills fell out. She counted them. 1, 2. I have exactly $2. Olivia nearly choked on her muffin. $2. For $2, you might get a firm handshake. If you're lucky. Who on earth would agree to that? "I don't know," Emily sighed, slumping in her chair. "A ghost? A malfunctioning robot? Or a very, very confused tourist?" She was completely defeated. But then, a low, steady voice came from the table next to them. "I will." Both Emily and Olivia snapped their heads around. Standing there was a man who looked like he'd just stepped off the cover of GQ magazine. Tall, in a perfectly tailored suit, holding a cup of coffee with a smile that was both charming and a little bit dangerous. Emily stammered. I'm sorry. What?" "Your offer," he said, his voice calm. $2 to be your boyfriend for an evening. I'll take the job." Olivia's jaw was on the floor. She leaned into Emily's ear, whispering frantically, "Who is this guy? An undercover agent? A struggling musician? A cult leader? Ask for his social security number." Emily ignored her friend, her suspicious gaze fixed on the stranger. "Are you serious? This is a joke, right?" "Not at all," he shrugged. It sounds like an adventure. I'm Brian. And from what I overheard, you need someone to look impressive at a wedding. I'm great at looking impressive. But I really only have $2. Brian just smiled. He gently pushed the 2 crumpled bills back toward her. This covers my coffee. The rest, I'm doing purely for the entertainment value. Olivia whispered. Friend, I feel like we're in the first scene of a movie. I just can't tell if it's a romance or a horror film. Emily just stared at Brian. There was something about him, something naggingly familiar, but she couldn't place it. Finally, she took a deep breath. Okay. Saturday. My sister's wedding. It's going to be full of rich, boring people. And you need to look like you own a yacht. Brian's lips curled into a sly grin. Looking like I own a yacht is my specialty. Text me the address. I'll be there. And before she could ask another question, he turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving Emily and Olivia completely frozen. Olivia was the one to break the silence. You just hired a living Ken doll for $2. Olivia whispered, her voice a mix of disbelief and excitement. If he doesn't turn out to be a serial killer, this is going to be the greatest story of all time. Emily was still trying to process what had just happened. She thought she had solved a problem for one evening. But she had no idea she'd just made a deal with her past, and her entire future. Saturday arrived faster than Emily would have liked. She'd spent the entire morning wrestling with a dress borrowed from Olivia, wearing a pair of heels that felt like a medieval torture device, and redoing her makeup 3 times until she felt she met the minimum qualifications for not being thrown out of a high society event. When the doorbell rang, she braced herself for anything. But not for this. The man at her door wasn't Brian from the coffee shop. I mean, technically it was him, but this version looked like he'd received a platinum tier upgrade. The suit he was wearing looked more expensive than 6 months of her rent. The watch on his wrist gleamed with subtle power, and his cologne made her nearly forget how to breathe. Emily could only manage one word. Wow. Brian's lips quirked into a small, powerful smile. Satisfied with your $2 investment? He asked, elegantly offering his arm. Where did you get this suit? Emily stammered, trying not to let her jaw hit the floor. Did you rent this, too? Let's just say I have my resources, he said mysteriously. There was no time to dig deeper. Her sister's wedding was already a minefield waiting to explode. Interrogating her fake boyfriend could wait. The venue was enough to make any normal person feel small. Sprawling gardens, decorations that cost more than a car, and guests who looked like they'd just torn themselves out of a celebrity magazine to attend. Relax, Brian whispered in her ear when he noticed her tension. You look beautiful. Thanks, she mumbled. And you look suspicious. Nobody looks this good for $2. Brian let out a soft chuckle. Maybe I have my own motives. Emily didn't have time to process his answer because her sister, Sarah, appeared like a storm of white tulle and arrogance. Emily. Her voice was sweet but laced with venom. What a surprise to see you here. And, this is Brian, my boyfriend. Emily forced a smile, gripping Brian's arm like a life raft. Brian politely extended a hand. A pleasure to meet you. Emily talks about you all the time. Oh, does she? Sarah gave Emily a suspicious glare. So, what do you do, Brian? I work, he replied. Where? In an office. Emily almost laughed at the absurd vagueness. Sarah, clearly annoyed at getting no information, just gave a fake smile and walked away. Throughout the ceremony, Emily noticed how Brian commanded attention. He had a confident posture, a quiet presence that screamed success. And when he turned to smile at her, it seemed alarmingly genuine. The most awkward moment came when her father decided to give a speech. He looked directly at Emily as if she were a chronic family illness. And of course, we are so happy that our Emily has finally found someone special, he said with the enthusiasm of someone announcing a new tax bracket. Emily felt her face burn with embarrassment. But Brian smoothly stood up, raising his glass. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Emily truly is special. I'm the lucky one to have been given a chance by her." The entire room seemed to sigh in admiration. Even Sarah looked a bit impressed. Emily stared at Brian as if he were an alien. How did he know her father's last name? She was sure she'd never said it. Brian just gave her a playful wink. Things really started to unravel during the first dance. In the midst of the glittering lights and soft music, Brian leaned in close to her ear. "You know, you haven't changed much since Westview High, 2018, he whispered, his voice a quiet bombshell. "You even laughed at me the same way you did when I tried to ask you to the prom." Emily froze. The memory hit her like a tidal wave. The scrawny kid with the huge glasses and the braces. The boy she and her popular friends had mercilessly laughed at by the lockers. Brian Walker. "Miller," he said, as if reading her mind. "I changed my last name after my parents' divorce. But yes, that was me." "Oh, my God." Emily started to laugh. A nervous, uncontrollable laugh that drew attention from those around them. "No, it can't be you," she said, struggling to catch her breath. "Brian from high school was a nerd, a loser." He smiled, a smile full of amusement at her meltdown. "People change, Emily. Contacts, braces off, and a better sense of style can do wonders." Emily was having a full-blown existential crisis in the middle of her sister's wedding. But before she could even process that revelation, another earthquake hit. A murmur started in a corner of the room. A guest, then another, started looking at their phones with shocked expressions, then looking over at them. Soon, the entire room fell into a strange silence. Olivia rushed over, her eyes wide as saucers. She gasped, shoving her phone in Emily's face. On the screen was a news alert, published just minutes ago. The giant headline screamed at her, "Billionaire CEO Brian Miller's secret romance revealed at lavish wedding." Below it was a perfectly captured candid photo of her and Brian dancing, looking like a fairy tale couple. Her brain shut down. The room started to spin. All eyes were on her, her sister's stunned gape, her father's utter disbelief, and the look on Brian's face, a look of calm resolve, as if he knew this storm was always coming. Billionaire. The nerd from high school. The $2 boyfriend. Somehow, all three were the same person. And Emily was standing in the middle of the wreckage, with absolutely no idea what to do next. For one long, eternal moment, the room was suspended in a deafening silence. Emily felt hundreds of eyes on her like tiny needles. Her brain was trying to process an impossible equation: the $2 guy, the rejected high school nerd, and the billionaire in the headline were somehow all the same person. Her first reaction was a primal instinct: flee. She grabbed Olivia's hand, mumbled a nonsensical apology, and bolted from the party in a blur, leaving behind a petrified family and a mysterious man calmly facing the hurricane he had just created. The next morning, Emily woke up with a faint hope that it was all a bizarre, champagne-fueled nightmare. But then her phone rang. It was Mr. Peterson, her boss from the restaurant. Emily. His voice was unusually tense. "Did you see the news this morning?" "Good morning to you too, Mr. Peterson," she replied, her heart beginning to pound. "Don't you good morning me. This establishment has an image to maintain. I can't have a waitress consorting with billionaires. What will the customers think? You're fired." The call ended. Emily sat on her bed, completely numb. She had just been fired. Not for spilling food or being late. She was fired because a picture of her with a billionaire was damaging to a restaurant whose Tuesday special was spaghetti and meatballs. Her life had officially become a ridiculous comedy. She was wallowing in despair with Olivia when the doorbell rang. Standing on her doorstep was none other than Brian Miller, looking just as polished as the day before, but with a hint of apology in his eyes. "We need to talk," he said. "There's nothing to talk about," Emily replied, trying to slam the door. But he was a step faster. "Emily, I'm sorry," he said, his voice softer. "I didn't expect it to blow up like that. But now it has. And I have a proposal. A business proposal." He explained that his board of directors was frantic and the media was like a pack of vultures. He needed a story to control the narrative. He needed her, with her authenticity, by his side for a while. Not as a $2 joke, but as a paid partner. He would cover all her expenses and her losses. And in return, she would help him navigate this storm. "You need my authenticity?" Emily asked, raising an eyebrow. "Or you need a human shield?" "Both," he admitted without hesitation. "But I promise, I won't let you get hurt." Having just lost her job with rent due, Emily didn't have many options. She reluctantly agreed. Their first mission, a charity auction at an art museum. An event Brian couldn't miss. That night, Emily found herself being transformed by a team of professionals. She was poured into an emerald green evening gown that she was sure cost more than her entire college tuition. When she walked downstairs, Brian's undisguised admiration was obvious. But Emily just felt like an imposter. The auction was another world. Women dripped with jewels, and men spoke of multi-million-dollar deals. And then, she appeared. Victoria Blackwell, Brian's ex-fiancée, glided over like a black swan, beautiful and venomous. "Brian, darling," she cooed, her voice like honey but her eyes like ice. "I didn't know you were coming. And this must be your new friend." Victoria's eyes scanned Emily from head to toe, as if assessing a discount item. "Emily, this is Victoria," Brian said, his voice slightly tense. "A pleasure to meet you," Emily said, extending a hand. Victoria merely glanced at it before turning her attention back to Brian. Throughout the evening, Victoria circled them. She didn't start a direct fight. Instead, she played a more sophisticated game. When the auction for an abstract painting began, Victoria sidled up to Emily. "Isn't that piece lovely?" she whispered. "Brian adores modern art. He would be so touched if you bought it for him." Emily looked at the painting, a chaotic mess of colorful lines she couldn't make sense of. But she saw the fake sincerity in Victoria's eyes. It was a trap. If she did nothing, she'd look like an indifferent girlfriend. If she participated, she'd look like a gold digger learning to spend her boyfriend's money. The paparazzi were already raising their cameras. Just as the auctioneer was about to close the bid, Emily smiled at Victoria. "Thank you for the suggestion. But I think the most meaningful gifts are the ones you can't buy." She then turned to Brian, speaking just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Brian, instead of buying this painting, why don't we use that money to fund the art program for an inner-city public school? I think that's a better way to honor art." The room went quiet. Victoria froze. She had a gold digger's first splurge headline all ready to go. But Emily had just turned her trap into a noble act of philanthropy. Brian looked at Emily, a genuine surprise and admiration in his eyes. He smiled, a truly radiant smile, and took her hand. "That's a brilliant idea," he announced to the room. "The Miller Corporation would like to donate $500,000 to the city's youth art programs. In Emily Thompson's name." He leaned in close to her ear. "That was the smartest answer I have ever heard." Victoria stood there, her smile frozen on her face, completely outplayed. Emily felt a rush of adrenaline. She hadn't just survived in Brian's world. She had just won a small battle. And as she looked into Brian's eyes, she realized something alarming. She wasn't just acting anymore. The feeling of being protected by him, of being trusted by him, it felt frighteningly real. Emily's feeling of victory lasted exactly until they got into the car. She was about to make a witty remark about her natural PR skills when Brian's phone rang. She watched his expression change. The CEO's confidence vanished, replaced by the raw panic of a man. "My mother," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "She had a heart attack." Emily's world tilted on its axis again. He said nothing more on the drive to her apartment, the silence in the luxurious car heavier than any words. As he rushed off, Emily stood alone at her door, feeling more like an outsider than ever. She was just a business partner. This was a family matter. She had no right to interfere. That's what her brain told her. But her heart was screaming a different message. The next day, after a sleepless night, she made a decision. She wasn't going to the hospital as Emily Thompson, the temporary business associate. She was going as Emily, a person who genuinely cared. The hospital was cold and sterile, a harsh contrast to the glamorous world she had just stepped into. She found him in the waiting area of the ICU. He was no longer Brian Miller, the powerful billionaire. He was just a scared son, his hair a mess, his expensive suit wrinkled, and his eyes hollow with exhaustion. For the first time, she saw him completely without his armor. He started, his voice hoarse. "You didn't have to come." "But I wanted to," she replied softly, sitting down next to him. They sat in silence for a long time. It was the silence that finally broke down the remaining barriers. "It was my fault," Brian finally said, his eyes fixed on a random spot on the floor. "All that news, the stress, Victoria, my mother always worries about me. The doctor said the stress was a factor." He took a shaky breath. "She was the only one who always believed in me. Even when I was a scrawny kid with thick glasses. She told me to be strong when the kids at school called me Professor Gadget and put gum in my hair." He turned to look at her. And in his eyes, Emily didn't see a billionaire, but a wounded boy. "That's why I'm so scared, Emily. I've spent my life building a fortress around myself, so that no one could ever make me feel that small again. I was terrified that if anyone, especially you, saw the real me inside, they'd laugh and walk away. Just like that day. This time, Emily didn't feel guilt. She felt a deep, aching empathy. She took his hand. And she confessed, her own voice trembling, I'm so afraid that everyone will find out I'm just a regular girl, that I don't belong in your world, and that I'll eventually embarrass you. I'm afraid I'm not good enough. In that moment of raw, unvarnished honesty, they were no longer the billionaire and the $2 girl. They were just two people, with two opposing fears that somehow mirrored each other perfectly. Just then, a familiar figure appeared at the end of the hall. It was her father. Emily's heart sank. Was he here to scold her? But Mr. Thompson just strode past her with a stiff nod and walked directly to Brian. Mr. Miller, he said, his voice serious. May I have a word with you, privately? Emily watched, stunned, as her father and Brian moved to a corner of the hallway. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she saw Brian's expression shift from surprise to understanding. A few minutes later, her father returned, gave her one long look, and left without another word. Brian walked back and sat down, looking at her in a completely new way. Your father, he began, his voice full of awe. He didn't ask about my business. He told me about your mother. He said she had a free spirit, and that he'd always tried too hard to protect her. He said, he sees that same fire in you. And he told me that if I wasn't the kind of man who could protect that fire without trying to put it out, then I should stay away from you. Tears began to stream down Emily's cheeks. For the first time in her life, she understood her father's coldness. It wasn't disapproval. It was clumsily disguised fear. Brian gently wiped her tears away. All the fortresses, all the contracts, all the pretense had dissolved in the antiseptic air of the hospital. All that was left was the truth. I love you, Emily, he whispered, and the words landed with absolute certainty. Not because you're authentic or funny. I love you for being you. All of you. Including your fears. I love you, too, she answered. And for the first time, the words weren't scary at all. Including the high school nerd inside of you. In the quiet of the hospital corridor, amid the anxiety of life and death, a real love was born. The contract was over. Real life had just begun. The days that followed existed in a strange, almost surreal peace. Brian's mother, Margaret, was recovering miraculously, and her warm presence seemed to mend everything. For the first time in her life, Emily felt like she had a real family, one built on laughter in the kitchen and conversations over tea, not on heavy obligations. Her relationship with Brian was no longer a contract or an arrangement. It was as natural as breathing. But the world outside the hospital was not nearly as gentle. The first storm hit one evening as they were curled up on the sofa, watching an old movie. Brian, with a rare hesitation, brought up a phrase Emily never thought she'd hear in real life: prenuptial agreement. It felt like a bucket of cold water on their fairy tale. He explained it wasn't his idea. The lawyers, the board of directors, they saw her as an uncontrollable variable, a risk to his empire. They don't understand you, he said, his voice full of frustration. A flicker of hurt passed through Emily, but it was quickly replaced by a clear-eyed understanding. She was in love with a man who belonged not just to her, but to a corporation. The next day, she went to Brian's law firm by herself. She walked in, full of confidence, and said she was ready to sign whatever they needed. Our trust isn't on a piece of paper, she told them. When Brian found out, he just looked at her with a love and respect that was even deeper than before. But just as they put out that fire, Victoria lit a bigger one. This time, she wasn't playing psychological games. She attacked head-on. A stack of legal documents was delivered to Brian's office. Victoria was suing him, but not for a trivial reason. She was accusing him of using private information from their relationship to make business deals, painting a picture of him as a ruthless, manipulative operator. It was a perfectly calculated attack designed to destroy both his personal reputation and his career. Their life changed. Romantic evenings were replaced by tense meetings with lawyers. Brian became stressed and distant. Not from her, but from the world. Emily watched the man she loved fighting a brutal war alone, and she felt helpless. She couldn't help him in a courtroom, but she refused to just sit by. In the middle of the storm, an idea took root. Emily realized that her story, from a $2 girl to facing down high society, could be a source of inspiration. She didn't want to just be Brian Miller's girlfriend in the headlines. She wanted an identity of her own. With Olivia and Margaret, she began to plan a small non-profit foundation called the Sunflower Project, with the mission of helping young women in difficult situations find their confidence and build their own paths. The work gave her a purpose, a something no one could take away. And then, another ghost from her past returned. Her sister, Sarah, showed up at Emily's apartment, stripped of her usual arrogance, left with only an empty exhaustion. Her $1 million marriage had crumbled. Her controlling husband had left her for a younger woman. "You were right, Emily," Sarah sobbed. "You were always free. I was the one who locked myself in a golden cage." Emily, now more mature and confident, felt no satisfaction. She just pulled her sister into a hug. In that moment, the icy wall between the two sisters, which had stood for years, finally melted away. It was the conversation with Sarah that gave Emily an idea. Sarah had been rambling about Victoria's habits when they used to be friends, about how Victoria documented everything, from conversations to receipts, as a way of maintaining control. A tiny detail sparked in Emily's memory. A fragment of information Victoria had let slip during their dramatic brunch. While Brian was drowning in legal papers, Emily started her own quiet investigation, piecing together clues. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but she knew she had to do something. Their relationship had been tested by doubt, by family, by the media. Now, it was facing a real enemy. And Emily wasn't going to let that enemy win. Their love had blossomed in a strange kind of adversity. By day, they were a team, facing storms together. But by night, the stress began to creep into the cracks. Brian was buried in legal documents, tense phone calls stretching late into the night. Emily poured her heart into the Sunflower Project and her silent investigation. They shared a roof but sometimes felt a million miles apart. Emily saw the dark circles under his eyes, the exhaustion in his every move, and a gnawing guilt ate at her. Was she the source of all this trouble? Without her, would his life be more peaceful? To give him space, she began to pull away quietly, burying her own worries so as not to add to his burden. She had no idea that her silence was a knife to Brian. He found her at the small office of her foundation, which was just starting to take shape. It was surrounded by planning boards and donation boxes. It was her world, created by her. He looked tired and defeated. "What are we doing, Emily?" he asked, his voice devoid of anger, filled only with a deep sadness. I don't understand. You're here, building this incredible thing. But at home, you're a ghost, he said, the pain clear in his eyes. You're pulling away from me. If you're having second thoughts, if you still think you're not good enough, or if this is all too much, you need to tell me. He stepped closer. I can't fight a war on two fronts, Emily. I can't fight Victoria and fight for your belief in us at the same time. I need to know that you are here. Really here. With me. Emily was stunned. He had completely misunderstood. Her withdrawal wasn't doubt. It was a clumsy attempt to protect him. But she didn't know how to explain. I love you, he said, his voice hoarse. But I can't keep doing this if I'm the only one holding on. When you decide that you really want this, all of it, even the worst parts, call me. He turned and walked away, leaving Emily standing in the middle of her own creation, feeling more alone than ever. The shock of that confrontation became her fuel. She realized that silence was the wrong answer. She needed to act. For the next 2 days, she threw herself into her investigation like a woman possessed. She connected Sarah's stories, the small details Victoria had let slip, and suspicious transactions she found in public reports. And then, she found it. A buried digital breadcrumb, a deleted email recovered from an old server, that proved Victoria had tried to sell Miller Corporation's inside information to a competitor long before Emily was ever in the picture. She didn't call Brian. Instead, she composed an email, attached all the meticulously organized evidence, and sent it directly to Brian and his legal team. In the subject line, she wrote only one sentence: I'm always on your team. In his office, Brian received the email. He opened it, and his world stopped. It wasn't just evidence that could end the lawsuit. It was a declaration. While he had been fighting his public battle, she had been silently fighting for him in her own way. He was wrong. He was so wrong to have doubted her. Even for a second. Love, regret, and a boundless admiration washed over him. The next day, Emily was at the foundation's office, trying to focus on her work, when Olivia burst in, breathless. You have to come outside. Now. Emily stepped outside and froze. Standing in the middle of the street was Brian, not in a power suit, but just as a man in love. Behind him was a giant banner, held up by his friends, with the words, Emily Thompson, I was wrong. Will you marry this fool? He walked toward her, amid the whispers and raised cell phones of passers-by. I asked you to believe in us, he said, his voice trembling with emotion. But I was the one who didn't trust your love. You were fighting for me in silence, and I was too blind in my own fear to see it. I am so sorry. And then, right there, on the sidewalk of a busy street, in front of the office where she had found herself, Brian Miller got down on one knee. He opened a small box, revealing a sparkling ring. I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be mine. Forever. Will you marry me? With tears streaming down her face, Emily looked at the man kneeling before her, at the unwavering love in his eyes. All the trials, all the pain, all the fear melted away. There was only one possible answer. Yes, she whispered, then shouted for the whole world to hear. Yes. Of course. Yes. He stood, slid the ring onto her finger, and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around as strangers applauded. In that moment, they weren't the billionaire and the $2 girl. They were just two people who had found each other, fought for each other, and finally, completely and irrevocably, chosen each other. 5 months later, Emily woke up on her wedding day with a strange feeling in her stomach. At first, she dismissed it as nerves. But the feeling was alarmingly familiar. It felt less like anxiety and more like the time she'd eaten too much spicy food at a street festival. "You look a little pale, honey," said Margaret, Brian's mother, as she helped adjust Emily's hair. "Must be the jitters." Emily smiled, but then a sudden thought, cold and hopeful all at once, shot through her mind. She rushed to a calendar, her trembling fingers counting the days. Once. Twice. Oh no. It couldn't be. "Olivia," she yelled. "We have a code red situation." An hour later, in the hotel bathroom, Emily stared at a small plastic stick as if it held all the secrets of the universe. 2 lines. 2 very clear, very definite pink lines. She was pregnant. She opened the bathroom door, her face a mixture of pure panic and unbelievable joy. Olivia and Margaret were waiting, and when they saw the test in her hand, the room erupted in happy screams. "I'm going to be an auntie," Olivia squealed. "I'm going to be a grandmother," Margaret wept with joy. "I'm going to be a mom," Emily whispered. "And I'm getting married in 2 hours. How do I tell Brian?" 2 hours later, she was standing at the altar, her heart pounding for multiple reasons. Brian was at the other end, his eyes fixed only on her, a look that held all the love and admiration in the world. As her father, with a rare, warm smile, gave her hand to Brian, she knew she had to tell him. The ceremony was a dream. But when the officiant spoke the familiar words, "If anyone here knows of any reason why these two should not be joined," Emily seized her chance. She leaned into Brian's ear, in the middle of the solemn silence. "I'm pregnant." Brian froze solid. He blinked once, twice. He looked at her, then instinctively down at her stomach, then back into her eyes, trying to process the information. "What?" he whispered back, his voice full of disbelief. "Pregnant," she repeated. "A baby. 9 months. Diapers and sleepless nights." The officiant cleared his throat, a little confused. "Mr. Miller, is everything all right?" Brian didn't seem to hear him. He turned to Emily, then back to the congregation of their family and friends. And then, the biggest, most radiant smile she had ever seen broke across his face. He turned to the officiant, then to the entire church, and proudly announced, "She's pregnant. I'm going to be a dad." The solemn silence shattered. Margaret shot to her feet, clapping, and soon the whole church was filled with cheers and applause. Emily was crying and laughing at the same time from a mixture of embarrassment and happiness. Brian ignored all protocol, pulled her into his arms, and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around right there at the altar. "Minister," Brian said, still holding Emily tightly, "could you speed up the rest of this? I need to kiss my pregnant wife." 1 year later, in the home office of their warm, light-filled house, Brian had just finished a call, closing a major deal with absolute calm. Victoria's lawsuit had ended months ago, a decisive victory for him thanks to the irrefutable evidence Emily had found. Victoria had vanished from their lives, becoming nothing more than a distant memory. Emily walked in, carrying a small baby girl with her father's eyes. She had just returned from a meeting for the Sunflower Project. Her foundation had grown remarkably, helping hundreds of young women across the country. Life had settled into a sweet, well-earned stability. Her eyes landed on an object, elegantly framed on the wall. Inside the glass were two crumpled, worn-out dollar bills. "You really framed it," she smiled. Brian came over, wrapping his arms around her and their daughter. "It was the best investment I ever made," he whispered, kissing her hair. "But it didn't buy me a fake girlfriend, Emily. It bought me my life." He looked at her, then down at their daughter, who was yawning in her mother's arms. "You two are the best things that have ever happened to me." Emily leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling a complete sense of peace. Their journey had started with desperation, a crazy offer, and $2. It had traveled through lies, fears, schemes, and tears. But in the end, it had led them here, to a place called home. "You know what's funny?" she said. "What?" "People always say love is priceless. But ours had a price tag." Brian laughed. "How much?" $2, she replied. "Best deal ever."